Go.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Stephen. I really appreciate being invited to the Charleston Conference to give this talk this morning. I am one of those first-timers. And when I first received the invitation, part of the challenge for me was deciding what I wanted to talk about because there are so many possibilities. So I do read against the grain and I see what's going on here at the conferences, but I thought it might be worth taking some time to dive into some of the past proceedings and see what kinds of things people are talking about. And I pretty quickly came to an obvious conclusion. People that come to the Charleston Conference like to talk about collections. You like to talk about sharing collections. You like to talk about acquiring collections. You like to talk about dealing with vendors and licensing when it comes to collections. We like to talk about managing and the weeding and lots of things about collections. So I thought, yeah, maybe I should talk about collections today. Now, here's the challenge. There's so many different things to talk about. And I thought, well, what's a commonality that we all share when it comes to collections? And it occurred to me that the one thing that binds us all together, no matter what we do with collections, is we want people to use our collections, right? Because otherwise, all that other stuff we're doing, if people aren't using it, what's the value? And when I say using it, I don't just mean it being there just in case someone wants to use it. I want to think more deeply about how we actually can create collisions with our collections so that people are having an interaction with the collections and people are engaging with the collections. And I think every single person who's worked in a library at any time in their life has heard some story about someone who said, you know, I went to the library and I discovered this book. I wasn't really even looking for it, but it really had a huge impact on me and my life. So I think that's really important. And the problem, the thing that concerns me, is whether we're designing that out of our libraries. So let me start by showing you a video with a collections theme. I call it Meeting in Stacks.
Hey, why don't you watch where you're going next time, all right?
Me? Look at you. You make me drop all these books. Hey, this looks like a pretty interesting book. What are you working on?
It's for my capstone research paper. I'm writing about the history of civil rights movements in northern cities.
How about that? I'm doing a paper on how Temple changed the landscape of North Philadelphia during the 60s.
Why don't we just carry all of our books over to a table and, maybe compare and contrast,
That's a good idea.
So let me tell you about what inspired me to do that video with some of our great students at Temple University. This summer I was in a co-chair of a committee for part of our campus master planning project. We are going through that process right now and looking at what should our campus look like over the next 20 years. And part of that is a new library that'll be part of that whole plan. So I co-chaired this committee that had about 9 faculty on it, and they represented all the different disciplines, or many of the different disciplines. And they obviously shared some of the things they wanted to see in a library, like a special study space or lounge for faculty with a fireplace in it, and lots of food. But the other thing that every single faculty member said is they want the library to have books. And they also said, this is important to us because we want the students to be in the library discovering the things that will create new mysteries for them that will lead them to become scholars. Now, I don't know if what I just showed you is actually happening in any of our libraries. You might have been, saying I had to suspend disbelief while you were watching that. But it's clearly important to them, and I think there's something of great value in it. So in this talk this morning, I want to basically cover 3 things. The first is a little bit about what's going on in the world with respect to engineered serendipity. Can you design into systems this actual serendipity so it takes place. And we would generally say there's a good thing when that happens. The next thing would be some of the challenges that we face in making that happen. And some of them are things that we might have control over, and some of them are things we don't have any control over. And the third thing I'll talk about before I wrap up is just a couple of ideas that maybe things we want to do to try to design collisions with collections into our libraries. And then we'll have a few minutes, and I think if you have some ideas or you're doing some interesting things in your libraries in this area, perhaps we have an opportunity to share that. So let's start by going back to 1754. All right, what happened? A British aristocrat named Horace Walpole writes a letter to his fellow British aristocrats in which he contemplates on the mysteries of good accidental discoveries. He finds this very fascinating, and he wonders, how do we make this happen? Why does it happen? How does it happen? And in the letter, he writes about a Persian fairy tale. It's called The Three Princes of Serendip. And in this fairy tale, these are these three princes that travel the world, and they're always having these amazing, fantastic, accidental discoveries. And so it's Horace Walpole in 1754 that actually coins the term serendipity. Fast forward to the 20th century. You have MIT social scientists who are doing experiments to see if they can engineer serendipity into the workplace or into the laboratory. And they're doing all kinds of studies. Some of them might be, what's the difference when you have 4 people sitting at a lunch table versus 12 people sitting at a lunch table? What's the difference between having people 6 feet apart from each other working as opposed to having people 20 feet apart from working? And in all these experiments, they keep coming back to one conclusion, and that's that the more you can do to bring people and things into closer proximity with each other, you're more likely to have better productivity, a greater ideation, and good things coming out of those interactions, those collisions between people and things. Now fast forward again to the 21st century. Nathan Eagle is a researcher at the MIT Media Labs, and he decides to do a digital age experiment, but basically the same thing. Can you engineer serendipity into the lives of people? So what he does is he gets 100 cell phones, and he programs them so that when they come within 5 feet of each other, they emit a signal that's unmistakable so that you would obviously go over and say, hey, your cell phone is making the same signal my cell phone is. And he gives them away to 100 random people in the MIT community. And the people have no idea that they have one of these phones. And his experiment again confirms that with the people who came in contact with each other and had this serendipitous collision, they ended up learning more about each other. They decided to, some cases, work on projects together. So he discovered again that there's good outcomes when you try to bring people together in a serendipitous way. Now, you see some of that engineered serendipity happening in different workplaces. There's a famous story about Steve Jobs, and it's kind of questionable whether it's true or not, but when he built the Pixar studios, he was very intentional about wanting all the people in the different departments, you know, the coders and the designers and the animators, he wanted them to come together. So he built this room where he thought everybody would come together and they would, you know, have these really great interactions, and a lot of creativity and ideation would come out of it. But people weren't going to the room, so he asked the designers of the building if they could move the bathrooms just to right outside that room, so that if you wanted to go to the bathroom, you had to go to right outside that room. Now, there's varying stories about whether it actually happened or not, but you know that's Steve Jobs, and you know that was behind his thinking of trying to engineer serendipity into the workplace. But you look more recently at what happened at Yahoo when Marissa Mayer became the CEO. She did something very controversial when she banned telecommuting, because her vision for improving the company, which had been very static, was to create this idea of one Yahoo, where all the people in the company would be in the same place working together, because she was very intentional about wanting them to collide and connect with each other and have these collisions that the research has shown again and again can make a workplace more productive, make people more creative. I also had a chance to visit in New York City a place called General Assembly. Has anybody ever heard of General Assembly? You worked at General Assembly. Okay, so General Assembly is a startup incubator in New York City. Oh, okay, that's for another talk. I'm talking about, no, this is not the United Nations General Assembly. This is, and maybe that's where they got the name. The General Assembly is a startup incubator, and here's what's interesting about it. There's dozens and dozens of startup companies working there, and there are no offices. Everybody is in this enormous room, and each company is at a bench. Doesn't matter if you're the CEO or the coder or the marketer or the salesperson. You'll all work together. And what's really amazing is you have a company that's working on online gambling over here, and a company that's working on online employment services over here. And everybody's kind of coming into contact with each other, and all these serendipitous accidents or good accidents are happening, and people are learning from each other. And one of the things they're primarily learning is how to become a good startup company, which means getting funding. That's always the hallmark of success. So those are just a couple of things that are happening in this increasing environment where people are trying to engineer serendipity into our lives. Now, the challenge is, I think, in libraries is that we're doing the exact opposite, and we're creating environments that might be engineering serendipity out of the library experience. So I showed you that first video, and I wanted to sort of do a reality check. So I asked students this question. Let's see what they had to say.
Well, I don't go to the library very often, and no, I have not.
No. I don't remember the last time I've been in a library.
I don't really get books from the library.
No, I've never had to look for a book in the library.
No, I haven't.
No. Yes. No.
Yeah, I found a book called Iracema. It's like on Brazilian culture, indigenous stuff. And I'm Brazilian, so I just started noticing a lot of things about my culture. And it was really cool, so yeah.
I actually have not. Most of my reading I do on my tablet.
Not recently. If I go to the library now, I'm going there because I know of a book I want to read.
No. Not this library.
I haven't checked out a book or looked at a book in a library since I was in elementary school.
I found this fantastic piece of poetry, actually. Opened it, and it was one of my favorite books ever. It's Walt Whitman.
I've never looked for a book at the library.
4 years ago, I did find one book, Introduction to C++. My brother had some weird issues of a program, so I was like, I'll pick up a book and learn the program today. And that's how I started my career.
Okay. So that video was shot right outside our library. And it can be a little bit disheartening and dismaying when we hear so many students say that they never go to the library and they never find any books. And I think that's just part of the challenge we face in a digital age. And I think the faculty who have these great aspirations like we do for students to come to our libraries and make these great discoveries is that we may not be realistic about 21st century college student research behavior. But we did hear that a few students did have some collisions with the collections in which they found something that was really interesting to them. Even Jack Sparrow, who I did not realize was one of our students, he found Walt Whitman. So he became a Walt Whitman fan. So yeah, what could we do to try to make those things happen? And what's happening that prevents it from happening? So just a couple of thoughts on that. And I think some of them are technological and some are economic and some are out of our control altogether. So for example, we're just buying fewer books altogether. Now, we still have plenty of books though, so maybe that's not the total issue. But one of the things is that we are caught in a sort of a difficult position because we know that the current expectations of our user community is that they want new kinds of space. They want collaborative workspaces, they want private study rooms, they want all kinds of interesting things. And most of us cannot build new buildings. We have to sacrifice existing spaces if we want to make some of these things happen that meet the new user expectations. And then we see things like this in the paper, which is very recent. This is University of Nebraska at Lincoln, and they're wanting to do that exact thing. You know, they say in this article that they're, over the past 10 years or so, their circulation statistics have plummeted from 400,000 something a year down to 100,000. And they, you know, have done all their research, and they feel very comfortable that they can take these books off of the first floor, put them in storage, or replace them with digital books, and still satisfy the needs of the community. So you see the typical responses to that here, where students say, you know, oh, I love the books being here in the library, even though they may not use them. And of course, there's the faculty quote that says, oh, I come to the library for the one book that I need, and I leave with 4 other books that get me excited about some new area of research that I didn't even think about previously. So this is something that we feel like we need to do, but again, as we do that, are we engineering the possibilities for collisions with collections out of our libraries? Then we have situations like, you know, we need to put books in remote storage, and I think more libraries, as they build the ASRS systems and the robotic systems, there's less likelihood that there may be collisions with collections. Now, I went to the Hunt Library back in July, and it's a beautiful library. It is a total wow experience. But what they did is really interesting, and it's sort of ironic to me, is that they built their book bot in a way that there's this huge glass window so that it's almost like a tourist attraction when you come in the library. And the day that I was there, I think I saw at least 3 groups, you know, being toured around the library, and everybody was stopped, and it's like, oh, wow, look at this thing. It's really amazing. But it was kind of ironic because no one can actually come into contact with any of the books. And so, you know, that raises a real dilemma for us. If we want people to have these collisions with our collections and we're putting them in these storage systems, you know, how do we make that happen? So I'll have a suggestion where I think that could be happening. I know they're working on these kinds of systems at North Carolina State University. And then you look at what's happening in higher education overall that might be having an impact. Like, for example, we know there's been a decline in the number of students that are humanities majors you know, this started back in 1970 when our humanities majors were about 14% of the student population, and it's now down to about 7% and holding steady. And you might say that, you know, those students in the humanities, possibly the social sciences, are the ones who are more likely to want to go to the library and be searching through the stacks and making these kind of discoveries. You know, where higher education is headed, unfortunately, is the conversation now is about, you know, what is college for? Is it for the liberal arts so that we can create students who are critical thinkers and ask questions and are lifelong learners? Or is it a experience where you just become prepared for a job? And we know that the pressures on our students and their parents to afford higher education puts a lot of pressure on them to be more focused on the job. And so students that are in fields like engineering and architecture, business, and even education to some extent really do question why they should go to a library and get books and make these kinds of discoveries, because it doesn't necessarily have anything to do from their perspective with their career preparation. And we know that even though our curriculums build general education courses into them so that students will have that exposure to the humanities, they are resistant to the kinds of education. And so we see many students, when you talk to them, say, I really don't understand why I have to learn about Shakespeare or some other subject of that nature. So those are just a couple of things that I see as possible external threats to the things that are happening in the library environment that I think to some extent it's what we do and the way we design our libraries, and to some extent it's external factors that are creating situations where it's less likely that we're going to get students who are going to be in the stacks having these great collisions with our collections. And of course the other issue is digital collections. You know, we're going from print to digital. And how do you have a collision with something that's not tangible? Okay, and so that's a technology issue. And how do we work our way around that one? So let me share a couple of thoughts on some things we might be doing to try to design into the library experience more collisions with collections. Now, the first one might be something that I think public libraries do very well, which is creating impulse zones. And the idea behind that is to put books where people don't expect to see them. And it might be a display near the front door of the library. It might be something like in this case where you put some books into the computer space. So a lot of us have Learning Commons, which in a way, Learning Commons are really interesting in that if you think about it, they really are designed for serendipitous discovery. You know, you're putting, you know, teaching and learning people there, you're putting tutors there, you're putting writing centers there, you've got librarians there, and the hope is that a student coming in is going to have a collision with all these different people that can help them be more successful in their academic work. But even something as simple as this, you know, I want to try to put books in places where people don't expect them. And this is a part in our library where there's some popular reading, there's graphic novels, and these books are pretty highly circulated because, you know, everybody's walking by it, you know, they're going to the computers or study spaces, and they stop and they check it out. And fortunately, people are discovering some interesting things there. Now, I know that you can't do this all over the library. You can't have little collections, you know, in 20 or 30 different places. That drives the control, you know, factor a little bit overboard, trying to keep track of where everything is. So another idea, one of our creative librarians came up with this idea for something called curated stacks, which are like visual bibliographies. And the thing that's interesting about it is that it's actually students who create these exhibits. And they're really simple, nothing fancy about it. You don't need a lot of money. They're really just facsimiles of specific books that that student actually discovered and became really enamored with and wanted to share with other students. And yes, you could potentially put a couple of books out there as well if you were not worried about, you know, them being found. But someone would know where they are, I guarantee that. But that's always a challenge when someone says, you know, I'm looking for this book, and it's like, oh, I'm not sure if it's in the curated stacks or over here or over there. So you got to be careful about that. So most of it is just facsimiles. And these could very easily be put in many different places around the library, just again to get people to engage with content that they didn't expect to find. This is something that public libraries do. And I think it's a very interesting idea. And I know that at least one, I read a report about an academic library trying, it's called Blind Date with a Book. And again, it's just the idea of trying to get people to interact with some printed content. And so what you do is you just kind of have this display in your library and you wrap the books up. So people don't know what the book is. And then on the cover of the book, you give the people some clues that, you know, what's the genre of this book, or maybe a hint from the plot or something along those lines. You know, and this could be very popular as far as just engaging people in wanting to encourage them to have a collision with a book that they might not otherwise have had in the library. Okay, so what do we do about the digital stuff? That's really challenging. So I'll make one suggestion, and this is something that I really hope people will look into when they get back to their libraries, which is this idea of helping our faculty create alternate textbooks. And one of the things that's nice about this is that most of the alternate textbooks that our faculty create are using content from the library. They're using articles from the databases. They're using chapters from the ebooks. But many other faculty will go out and find additional materials in the world of open educational resources. And we actually have a project where we try to take a couple of faculty each academic year and encourage them to ditch their textbook and start giving students access. I don't even like calling them textbooks anymore. I call them, it's sort of like digital learning materials. It's probably a better word for what we're trying to get people to do. And this has actually been very successful. For one thing, students love it because they don't have to buy a textbook. So that's an obvious win for the students. And it's a win for the faculty because they don't feel guilty that they're making the students spend all the money. But in talking to the faculty that have done this program, one of the things they feel really good about this is that they are exposing students to library resources. They're exposing them to some of our content that's in databases and ebooks. So the stuff isn't just sitting there. They're actually getting the students into the content and exposing them to it so that they'll hopefully have the students wanting to go back and use it again and again. And one of the things we've also discovered in these alternate textbook projects is more, you know, one of the challenges of giving students digital learning materials is that they're somewhat resistant if they can't get something in print. But the faculty that I've talked to, as more students come to campus with laptops and tablets, the students are becoming much more amenable to having digital learning materials because they can read the materials much more easily on their electronic devices, although we need to be careful about accessibility issues. That's a huge issue on our campuses now. So I hope you'll look into all textbook projects. This is something that's not too difficult to do because I'm always dismayed when our response to the textbook challenge is to just buy the textbooks and put them on reserve, because that really doesn't solve the whole broken textbook publishing system. As librarians, we do have the power to guide faculty to other kinds of alternate resources, and we're not the only ones doing it. There are many other libraries that are getting into this idea of helping faculty adopt digital learning materials. Now, this is something you may have seen. This is the Digital Public Library of America, and they just released this about a week ago. And this is their virtual book browse. And this might be the solution to removing books from stacks and giving people the capacity to search for books that are either in remote storage systems or are just purely, born digital. And so over on the left side, you see there's different colors and sizes of the bands, and I believe that has something to do with the relevance of the book to your search. And it's and I think it works okay. You absolutely can browse a collection this way. And you can see some images from the books, you can get some information, but it's sort of like comparing like a gourmet dining experience to a fast food experience. You're eating, but it's not the same. So you're browsing, but it doesn't feel, you can't open up the books and, have that tactile experience of browsing through and turning pages and seeing things. I don't know how we do that exactly. As part of the preparation for my talk today, I did do a little investigation into what's happening into the world of holographic displays. And I don't think we're there yet, but maybe 10 years from now, it might be very conceivable to have holographic books where people could bring them up on a screen and virtually turn pages and see what's in those books. So that might be a future iteration of a virtual browse like this. So I hope giving you a strong message here that there is something of value in creating collisions with our collections. I know with all the challenges you face at your workplace and all the difficulties you have at your jobs, what I'm talking about here today might seem trivial, but I assure you it is not trivial. It is really important to what we do in our libraries. And if you think back over history, some of the world's most important events were totally serendipitous. I mean, this country was discovered by accident. Columbus was not looking for this country. He was looking for India. A scientist put some dirty dishes with bacteria in his lab and forgot about them. And when he came back a week later, he saw this really strange mold growing on the bacteria. And he saw that it was eating away the bacteria. That's how penicillin was discovered. Those are some really important accidental discoveries. There's many others that are not as important. Wheaties, Coca-Cola, Post-it notes, Slinkies, all accidental discoveries. So I want to finish with another video that I call an often heard story.
I got drawn into the honeybee world completely by a fluke. I was 18 years old and bored, and I picked up a book at the library on bees, and I spent the night reading it. I had never thought about insects living in complex societies. It was like the best of science fiction come true. And when I put down the book, I knew I had to see this for myself.
Okay, that's Martha Spivak. And I think the operative word here was, I was bored, and I went to the library, and I discovered a book about bees. Now, if you don't know Martha Spivak, she is the world's renowned expert on bees. She is a MacArthur genius. And she is probably one of the most important people in the world right now, because she is exploring how to stop bee colony disease, which is killing all the bees. And if we don't have bees, that's serious trouble for our world. And would you think for a minute that her whole life was changed and shaped because she went into a library and had a collision with something in our collection? That's pretty phenomenal. That says that we do things that make a difference in people's lives with our collections, and that we can change the world with the things in our collection. But it's not going to happen if we don't figure out how to do a better job of designing the collisions with our collections into the library experience. And I'll just finish by saying that, as far as I'm concerned, if we can do that, too much of that would never be enough. Thank you.
No. Don't go away. Questions? Questions? Yeah?
Yeah.
Questions. Don't sit
or
down.
Discussion.
Okay. Questions come forward. While they're coming forward, quickly, I'm doing research. I'm also a researcher when I'm not doing Charleston. And we're doing research on trust. And we're asking people about changes in digital environment over the last 10 years. And a significant number of the researchers are saying, everything's so much better, discovery is wonderful, but we miss the possibility of going into library and turning over the pages of the journals we're interested in. What about journals? That's more important for most people. Not here, I know, but...
You know, that's a good point. I didn't really think about that very much. I think when you think about what's happening in the world of our journals, they're just disappearing from our libraries. I mean, I know at my own library, there's barely any of them left. And again, I mentioned that some of the factors here are economic. So on one side, we can save a little money when the publishers come to us and say, you want to subscribe, we can give you a better deal if you just take the electronic and not the print. And of course, there's obviously a lot of maintenance issues that we save when we don't have the print. I'm kind of surprised that faculty are saying, I really want to come over to the library and browse the journals, and I think...
Well, they don't, actually. They want to have something that replaces that.
Oh. Okay.
They want to have something that replaces the experience of turning over the pages. That's a difficult thing. They're not going to come into the library.
Well, you know, I guess software like...
I'm sorry, I'm not...
Flipboard might be a good activity for them, because Flipboard does give you the experience of turning pages in a digital environment.
Okay, I won't continue that.
Anthony,
hello. Okay.
Anthony,
yeah?
This is Hazel in Colonial.
Good.
Can we just say that the sound is a little indistinct in here, where we're having a little bit of trouble hearing both you and the speaker?
The other guy.
Thank you.
Just flag that up.
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, when you hold the microphone, near.
Yeah, I know.
That's okay. It's when it drifts away.
I was drifting away. I was overcome with excitement. Now, we'll have a question from here first, at the back there. Okay. Yes?
I have two comments.
I know you're Chuck Hamaker, but tell them.
I'm at Chuck Hamaker, University of North Carolina, Charlotte, Atkins Library. I have two experiences that I think sort of counter a little bit the concerns. We leased about 11,000 streaming videos that were turned on the 1st of July. We did not get all of the records into our catalog, which is WorldCat Local, until considerably later. We did no promotion to faculty. We did no promotion outside. And in September, the university starts again in the middle of August. The month of September, without promotion, of those 11,000 videos, 1,000 of them had been downloaded and used with almost no promotion. So I think people are finding things in the electronic environment. The other comment is that we went to WorldCat Local because of the exploration factor. That is, you get Ferberized records. You also get records associated with an individual title or subject you may be interested in. So it'll show you the articles in journals that are review articles or refer to a particular title. So our electronic catalogs, I think, are providing some of this collision factor, some of this discovery factor in ways that we couldn't do even 5 years ago. The Discovery Services have a role in that, obviously. And with, ARLs now are about 70 to 75% of their expenditures in electronic resources, the discovery tools, not just Summons and EDS, but how your catalog works, what resources you have. I was actually
Okay,
shocked.
well, thank you for sharing that you're creating some electronic resources that are doing that. Again, with some of the electronic journals, and I think particularly with videos, it may not be quite the same as with books, but I think it's good that we're having advances in our systems that might make more of these collisions possible. So thank you for sharing that, Chuck.
Now, have we any questions from Colonial? No. Any questions from Gold? No.
No.
Okay, lady at the back, please.
Thank you. My name is Kate Jorensen. I'm from the University of Pittsburgh. And I'm having a moment, my co-authors and I are having a moment of serendipity right now,
Okay, good.
listening to your talk.
Thanks.
Yesterday we presented on browsing in the electronic environment, and specifically how serendipity can be a cultivated experience in the electronic environment. And what I'm wondering is, one of the things that we were interested in is specifically identifying barriers to cultivated serendipity in the electronic environment. And what is preventing us from sharing our experiences with vendors who are developing tools that could, in fact, cultivate a little bit more accidental finds than they currently are. And I'm wondering if you have ideas for how we could develop closer relationships with vendors and developers where we can use our insight as librarians, where we're really we're with patrons as they're having those confused moments, right? So using that insight, I'm just wondering if you have thoughts on that.
To some extent, you answered your question in that it's possibly going to be having encounters with the organizations that make the systems, or it's quite possibly that we might need to be the ones that make the systems ourselves, rather than waiting for a vendor to do that, although I imagine that some of them are trying to work on this. I know one of the things I didn't get to do in preparing was try to get a better sense of to what extent people are having serendipitous explorations of electronic collections. I mean, the anecdotal evidence that I see is that when people come to the electronic collections or the discovery systems, they're kind of like focused in on getting some specific thing. And it just doesn't give them the same experience of like, oh, I want to look through 20, 30, 40 screens, in the way that I might browse through 150, 200 books as I'm up in the stacks. So I think that's a challenge to try to replicate that kind of experience. But again, this is part of what we need to do. And I'm glad to hear that you and your colleagues are exploring this.
Yeah, thank you for your
I'd
talk.
appreciate the chance of a conversation with you at the break, if I may.
Okay.
Because now, anybody has any more questions for Stephen, who I thought was very stimulating this morning?
Thank you, Anthony.
Anybody upstairs? Anybody tweeting particularly? No particular Twitters going on. Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody.
Now,